This presentation on taking control of deductions and developing a deduction dashboard by Jessica Butler. I'm Ken Frisco from the Federation of Credit. We're sponsoring this particular webinar, and again, thanks for joining. Jessica's background, just to give you a little indication of who she is and some of her professional resume. Jessica is the founder of Attain Consulting Group, which is a deduction and chargeback management advisory firm. And Attain was created in 2004 and provides practical experience-based solutions in all areas of the deduction management process. Jessica, as a former partner with Grant Thornton, has over 26 years of consulting experience and has dedicated most of the past 12 years focusing exclusively in the area of deduction and chargeback management. Jessica is also a CPA and received her MBA from New York University. So without further ado, I will turn the mic over to Jessica, and she can start the program for you.
Great. Actually, I think, Justin, you're going to say a few words, right?
Yeah, just a couple of things to get out of the way, some housekeeping before we begin. If anyone does have any questions throughout the presentation, you can feel free to put those into the questions box, and we will pose those either as they come along or keep them all at the end for Q&A, depending on the relevance of the question. We also have a brief survey that everyone can fill out when they exit the webinar. It only takes about 15 to 20 seconds to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great insight on how to keep continuing to improve our webinars going forward and how to better serve you guys. So with that, we're now actually going to pass it over to Jessica so she can start the presentation.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Justin. So welcome. We're going to talk today about developing a deduction dashboard. Before we get into that, though, I'm going to share with you what we're going to go through, and then we'll do a little ground setting and make sure that we all have the same understanding of deductions. I'm going to talk a little bit about why a dashboard is important, how you can figure out and define the information that you have available within your company to develop the dashboard, how to think about management's priorities to really figure out what's going to be important for your dashboard, how to pick some of those components, and then we'll spend the bulk of the time looking through some sample dashboards, giving you some ideas about things that you might want to include on the dashboard. Before we do that, I just want to spend just a couple of minutes about deductions. I think everybody on the call knows what deductions are. You probably call them different things. Some people call them deductions, some people chargebacks, short pay, disputes. And the question I always ask groups is, what's the difference between a deduction and a chargeback? So I can't ask for responses. It would take a long time for people to type it in. So just let me give you kind of the answer. And it's sort of a trick question because there is not necessarily a difference. It really depends on your experience and your background and usually what industry that you're in. So in certain industries, especially apparel and footwear and soft goods, typically a deduction and a chargeback are the same thing. So they don't really differentiate between them at all. In other industries, however, there's a big difference. So in some industries, a deduction is any short payment that you get from your customer. That's a deduction. And then once you do the research, if you determine that it's not valid and your customer was wrong, you charge back the customer, and then they become chargebacks. And the reason that I bring it up, and I think it's important to mention, is when you're having discussions with people, whether it's customers, whether it's peers, or even people within your own company, it's really a good idea to level set. It's a good idea to make sure everyone's talking about the same thing. I've had several experiences, and one that is very clear. Years ago, I was working with someone, and the woman was the head of the chargeback department, which dealt with all of the deductions and chargebacks. I use the word, usually I use it synonymously, so it means the same thing. And it did to this woman as well. So she was looking for a report to get all of the chargebacks out of the system. So everything that was deducted by a customer. And what happened was we went through a report. We were talking about a report with the IT manager and explaining what we wanted and talking about the chargebacks that we wanted. And about halfway through the discussion, he said, let me ask you a question. Is there some reason you're only asking me to pull the chargebacks? What about the rest of the deductions? What do you want me to do with those? And we realized that he was going to be giving us the wrong report. It was not what we were looking for. So that was a great lesson to me to learn. Always make sure that when you're talking to someone, you make sure you're talking about the same thing. So throughout today's presentation, I'm going to probably use both words. I'll use deduction sometimes. I use chargebacks. I try to be sensitive to the clients that I'm working with and use the words that they're most comfortable with. So as a result, I use them both all the time. So I mean the same thing, whether I say a deduction or a chargeback. So hopefully that's not too confusing. So let's think about why you need a dashboard. What does a dashboard do? When you look at managing deductions, you cannot control them and prevent them from one department. Lots of different departments are involved. It's really a company-wide effort. While often people in the accounts receivable area, the burden of resolving them and managing them falls in your lap, really you're not the ones that are creating these deductions. It's usually not by anything that you've done that these occur. So therefore, you've got to get other people involved. And in getting other people involved, what's really critical is to make sure that you have senior management support. If senior management doesn't buy into helping a company manage deductions, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to get other departments to step up if senior management doesn't buy in. So if you have challenges, and often the #1 internal challenge that companies state when we ask them, what's your biggest obstacle that you have internally to controlling deductions, the #1 is always cross-departmental cooperation. So if you're like many other companies and that's a challenge, one of the great ways to really get started in getting other people involved is by getting senior management's buy-in and getting their support. Because if they're interested and they start to get it and they realize that it's important, they will make other people get involved. Often companies struggle to get senior management involved. And sometimes if they're not involved, they may not review information or they can't take action. If you look at standard reporting, I often find that reporting that a lot of companies do, it's very difficult for senior management to look at because they may not have a detailed understanding of everything about deductions. And often senior management comes up through the sales and marketing ranks. So they think about, when they think about deductions, they think about promotions, trade promotions and allowances. So it's the cost of doing business. So what do you want them to do? And if you look at standard reporting that is often, let's say, by reason code, and you have lots of reason codes, if you sort, let's say, alphabetically, what's at the top? Advertising, allowances. So senior management, they look at the first few lines and they're like, yep, cost of doing business, next, or retailer profit center, next. If you sort by dollar amount, on the other hand, again, what are the biggest dollars that are often taken? Allowances, advertising. So it's the same thing. So the whole goal of a dashboard is to really have this flash report. How can you, with one page, give senior management really good high-level information that they can very quickly take a look at and see where are their areas of concern, where do you need improvement, what are the issues? What's either the problem, whether it's a customer or a reason code. You'll see as we go through some examples a little bit later, how can you show things? Should they be in chart form, in graph form? Are they numbers? And it really depends on who your audience is and what they like. And the great thing I think about a dashboard is you can really customize it so that you can put in the things that are really of interest to senior management. So while you think about what's important to you and what you might need, you really want to think about, what do I want senior management to see? What's important to them? What help am I trying to get from them? And use that to help guide the development of the dashboard. And it's not the end all. You don't stop with a dashboard. It's really the springboard for further discussion. You want senior management to ask questions. You want them to want more information because you've got to get into some of the underlying factors in order to really make improvements. So first what you want to do is start with saying what information is available. What information do you currently have available, either from your deduction management system or from your AR system? What you don't want to do when you're developing a dashboard is put together something that's really great, but really complicated and really labor-intensive and very manual to prepare. It doesn't make sense for you to have to spend a lot of time trying to put something together, so you really need to figure out what information do you have available. So what I often do when I'm working with my clients to develop a dashboard, we look at what reports are you generating right now, what deduction reports. What's available. I look at how are you getting the reports, but are there other filters? Is there a different selection criteria? Can we take your deduction information, for example, and just do an extract into Excel, dump it into Excel, because then with a pivot table we can do so many different things. I have a client right now where we came up with a great dashboard for senior management, and it literally does not take longer than 5 or 6 minutes for us to create from the pivot tables that we do. We definitely do it separately. It's not an automatic report because we are pulling different information from different places, but it's really, really quick. So you'll want to see what kind of screen views do I have? What kind of queries can I get? Can I do these extracts? So you really want to think about, start with what data is available. And I recommend maybe you populate a checklist like this one that you see on your screen right now, or whatever makes sense to you. This just gives you some things to start thinking about. It's often really important for any kind of a dashboard to have information on total deductions received. So think about, can you capture the total deduction dollars that are received? Can you get the count of deductions that are received? Can I get it in total? Can I get it by customer? Can I get it by reason? Do I have a date so I can have it aged? All really important things when you're looking at different information. And again, this is just trying to compile what's available in creating your dashboard. You may want to look at you always want to look at open deductions. You want to look at deductions that are closed. Can you tell what's written off versus credited versus recovered? That's terrific if you can. So you just sort of want to look at that and see if that information is available or not. Are you able to look at individual deductions, like individual line items, and then sort them by dollar amount? Most of this stuff you should be able to get this information. You should be able to extract it somehow. Hopefully you're not managing your deductions themselves within Excel, but if you are, you already have the data. But I would assume that most of you on the call are using some ERP system or a separate deduction management system to track your deductions, but most of them have the ability to export the data. See if you have different statuses of deductions. Can you tell where it is in the kind of the life cycle of the deduction? Can you tell whether a deduction is valid or invalid? Do you track that information? Can you look at, or do you have sales volumes by customer? As you'll see later on, sometimes, especially, it's often very important for senior management to look at deductions as a % of sales. So you need to be able to get sales information if you want to do that. And then any other data elements that you think are important, it's really good to try to include and look at them to just gather the information that you have. Then once you do that, you really want to think about what's management's priorities, what's really important to them. Definitely you can start with what you think is important to you, and you could think about what are our big problem areas, but then also think about what's important to them, what are their hot buttons, and what kind of information can I show them that's going to either pique their interest or answer their questions. So again, I tried to give you kind of a start to give you a little guideline on think about how important are each one of these to senior management. From 1, which is very important, or to 5, which is not very important, or whatever ranking you'd like to do. How important is it that they see the open deduction balance? How important that they see what's written off or credited versus recovered, or do they just want to see what's closed? Are trends over time important, or are they just interested in the here and now? How about key deduction issues? What's the biggest reason code? What's the biggest problem or the biggest customers? I often like to break information out by intentional or sales-related deductions versus preventable deductions. And a little bit later, I'll share with you how I classify different deductions. But every deduction, every reason code isn't the same. So all of those trade promotions and advertising and allowances and rebates, those don't mean the same thing as compliance violations. But chances are those sales related, you mean to give those away. That is the cost of doing business. So you want to track those and separate those from shortages or compliance, ASN and late deliveries and packing violations. Those are very different, and those are things that you can fix within your company. So I like to look at things a little bit differently. Age is very important. Often companies really have a target in their organization that, let's say, for example, I want to track deductions over 90 days and keep that below a certain percent. Then you want to make sure that you're doing that. And even if you don't track something like that, it's a really good thing to start thinking about how can I start looking at how these things are aging. Deductions as a percent of sales, top deduction reason codes, the total deductions received. So you get the idea. Again, it's not like there are so many different variables or components of managing deductions, but they can be looked at in so many different ways that often you need to look at a piece of information one way, and then that sort of poses a question, and then you look at it a different way. So then what you want to do, and when you think about it, if you think about putting together a dashboard, think about different types of deduction information. There are in my mind, there are two different types of overall information. When you're looking at deductions, the first thing is, how well am I doing at my sales and fulfillment process? So I have vendor agreements. I have to talk about my trade spend, and I have my return policies in there, and maybe I had my advertising right, all of my deals that hopefully the salespeople are writing up, but often they may not. I have the compliance manual for the customer that outlines the packing, the labeling, all of that sort of stuff. And then I've got routing guides, logistics. So how well am I doing at my sales and fulfillment processes? The way I find out how well I'm doing is by the deductions received. So it's very important, I think, when you're developing a dashboard to have some information on how many total deductions have I received. That's not open deductions, that's new deductions total, because that is an indication on how well I'm doing as a company in managing the business with my customer. And often companies overlook that. They really are only focusing on open. And when I go to companies sometimes and they say, look, my open balance is so low, and I say, that's great. Let's look at your total deductions received, because maybe you've written a lot off and maybe you've closed a lot, and that's really an indication of how well a company is doing business. But then the second piece is, now that I've got these deductions, now I look at my deduction management process. So that's how well am I identifying deductions, researching them, recovering them, resolving them, preventing them. And the way that you can take a look at that is by kind of the deductions prevented, and also by looking at what's open. So if I'm able to prevent things going forward, that's terrific. And how well I'm managing the whole process of moving the deductions through the system, I find by looking at my open deductions. So hopefully that makes sense to you. It's pretty logical, but it's important to think about these two pieces separately. And often when I go in and talk with companies, they're not looking at both of them separately. You know, they're only looking at the open, and they're not really looking at total deductions received. I also mentioned a couple of minutes ago the way I try to classify deductions, so I'm going to share that with you. I usually have 3 different buckets. The first one I call intentional, and that's really sales related. Those are pre-authorized, really the cost of doing business, everything that you should know about and should be able to really resolve quickly. Discounts, advertising, allowances, you can see here what these types of things are. The next bucket's preventable. So preventable typically comes from compliance violations. And again, theoretically, you can prevent these if you do everything the way the customer is telling you. Realistically, you can't prevent all of them, because you're always going to get some, and some are going to be invalid, and they're going to keep changing the rules. However, you usually have an idea. Most companies have the ability to save some money by preventing some of these, and it really varies by company what yours are. And here are some of the underlying reasons that you might find for deductions that I call preventable. So ASN violations or fill rate, some carton markings. you may look at the bottom here and see shortages and say, wait a minute, I can't prevent shortages. You know, I'm shipping fine and it's the customer who's finding the shortages. And the reality is that shortages are very interesting. Some shortages really are preventable. Sometimes what you find is that you've set up the kind of the catalog information incorrectly, or the customer has the wrong information, or you've got substitutions, and substitutions are causing the customer to have a shortage on one style and an overage on another, but they're not telling you about that. Or you may have you may receive cartons from overseas and be shipping out full cartons, so you may not do any inbound audits. So you may be contributing to shortages that you have with the customer. So there are some shortages that I feel are actually preventable. And then you have this final group, which is unauthorized, where you can't necessarily prevent all of these, and there may not be pre-planned, like returns. If you have a return authorization or a defective allowance, I might say that that's intentional. But if you don't, if people return the product, then that's probably unauthorized. You're going to get it. You can't prevent it. You may not have known about it, but you can have processes in place to manage it properly. So those are kind of the three buckets that I look at, and you'll see as we go through and look at some of the sample dashboards, I sometimes break them out. I certainly break out intentional from the others from time to time. But again, it depends on your company, depends on what industry you're in, depends on where your biggest deductions fall and what you're really trying to do, how you drive that. So then the next step is you're selecting the dashboard components. So typically, there may be 4 to 8 components in an overview dashboard. I have had some clients where, you know, they insist that we go to a second side because they just have too much that they want to look at, and look, that's okay. But you want someone to be able to look quickly and get a good handle on some of the information. Usually they have, you know, the deductions received, the open balances, how things were closed. I'd like to try to show deductions by responsible department. I think it's important to have each reason code or each deduction reason assigned to a responsible department, so that when you look at information, you can see what areas can either take responsibility for looking to see whether there are things that they can prevent, or if there are things that are open a long time and they're waiting in their queue to resolve or approve. You want to kind of point that out and have people see that people need to be accountable. May want to look at deduction, a status or activity. Again, it depends on the information that you have. Depending on the preferences of your audience, you can think about how can I use both data tables and charts and graphs. And again, I'm going to show you a number of different things because people are different and they want to look at different things. And it's think about it. It's less important what you like and what you think you want. It's more important how can I get the audience to really respond to this, and how can I make it something that they're asking for. And that's what you want to do. So here is the first sample dashboard. Don't worry about it. Don't try to read it. I'm going to show you little snippets, but this is what it might look like. And actually, this was in progress because that nice little blank space you see on the right-hand side, we ultimately did fill that in with something else. But the information that you might find, you know, here is in chart form. We wanted to show very quickly, here's what's happening to the deduction balance. You know, here are the new deductions, that navy blue line, here are the new deductions. You can see what's closed, and then the red line at the top, you can see what's open. So what's great to be able to see over time, as we were looking at it, how the open balance was really dropping. And over 90 days was also important to this company. And as well, you could see that the over 90-day balance was also dropping. So once people became familiar with what the dashboard looked like and what was important to them, they could quickly see, are we doing okay, not okay, was there a spike, what's the problem? And then over to the right-hand side of the dashboard, we gave a lot of the same information. A lot of this data was driving those charts, so that there are some people who are more numbers people and want to see the detail so that they could look at this. And in addition on here, not only did we have some of the dollars, but we put the count of deductions as well. It would have been really it would not have worked to graph that, because the difference between $1 million and 598, for example, such a difference that if on the same chart you were trying to kind of graph both those different numbers, it would not have been very helpful. Another thing that I typically try to include, as I mentioned, is something by responsible department. And again, even if you look at this table, there are two different parts. This first you see the responsible department, but then the second column, that's year-to-date received. So those are the new deductions that were received where these departments are responsible. And then the last four columns, this is what was open at the end of the month. So if I look at that, I'm going to look at sales, and I see that sales had the most, right? So year-to-date, that sales had $11 million in new deductions. And I might think, okay, you know, that's reasonable. They have all the promos, and they have allowances, and they have, you know, markdown and margin, all that kind of stuff. So that's fine. And I might look and say, okay, we still have $500,000 open. That may be okay or not okay for your company. And I might look and go, and I still have, you know, 20% of what's open is over 90 days. And I might think, gee, what is that? These things should be cleared immediately. How come they're not cleared? Or I may be, hey, that's fine. And again, it's just different information. I might look at, let's say, again, if I'm looking at this and I look at the warehouse. So typically the warehouse, there's shortages and maybe they're early delivery and there's substitutions if I get that charge, and they may be whatever they are, all the shipping violations, you know, consecutive day, all that kind of stuff. Again, depending on your industry, some of these are meaningful, some of them aren't. They may also be shortages. So I look and say, okay, I've had $1.7 million of those year to date. Maybe that's okay or not okay. But I still have $2 million open. So is that a lot or not a lot? But only $300,000 over 90 days. So again, you know, these numbers, it depends on kind of what your goals are and what your targets are. But you'll look at this and very quickly things will jump out. And people will be able to go right to what they think is important. You may also put together a few bullet points that sort of summarize the flash report or your dashboard and let them know. Then I might have another chart which is kind of similar, but now it's by reason code. So I might have my different reasons on the left-hand side and then have my responsible department and show the total dollars year to date, and then I'm going to show some information from my open balance, like what's open this month, what the change was from last month, because that's nice to be able to see, am I doing better or worse, what's over 90 days. So again, it really, there's no right answer for any of these, but it really helps you figure out what's going on. So in this particular case, again, my eye would automatically go to kind of these carton shortages in compliance. So I've had, you know, 800,000 shortages this year, but I've got $1.3 million that are open and 1.1 over 90 days. So to me, if I'm senior management, I'm saying, what's going on with shortages? Like, why are they taking me so long to validate? Are they right? Are they wrong? Who are the customers? You know, some questions point out. The same thing with compliance. This would make me say, what are my compliance violations? I don't want to lose $600,000 so far this year, or, you know, why do I have $1 million? What am I waiting for? So that's what it would make me do, and that's what you're trying to get senior management to support you, to help you, to have people focus on what's important. I often try to include kind of what are the top deductions, individual deductions that I received that month, just so people can see what's happening. So, you know, wow, I had $1 million return from Foot Locker this month. Ooh, that's a lot. So, you know, maybe that's why my returns went up. Or I have, you know, from Kohl's, $347,000 in one advertising. You know, that's a lot. And it's interesting to know, or maybe I'm looking towards the bottom, why don't I know what Foot Locker's $25,000 deduction is? Why is that blank? Why don't I have a reason code? Okay. You know, you see kind of the ideas. We're just going to go through some more samples to give you ideas. It's really a lot of food for thought to think about what types of things can you put in a dashboard, what resonates with you. I like to try to include the top 10 open deduction or chargeback, whatever you want to call them, the top 10 open deduction balances. Here is where I often exclude the sales related. maybe I show them separately, but I really want to look at what are these kind of non-sales, their compliance, their returns, their shortages. What are they that I really want to look at and try to understand and look at the top 10 balances because I want to focus on those customers. So here I've shown that what's open, I've shown what's over 90 days, and then also I try to just summarize what some of the key reasons are. And what's so important here, like if I were to look at this, I'd say, hey guys, if we focus on our top 10 customers, they're 66% of our open deduction balance, excluding the sales related, 66%. Like, can't we get those knocked out? Or even if I look at the top, look, the top two, are 36%. That's huge. So how do we look at that? How can we try to work on that? What do we need to do as a company to do a better job of preventing these, of really understanding them? Really helps you quickly, I think, be able to focus on what you want to tell senior management. And then often companies also want to look at things as a percent of sales. So here is where I might look at, put in year-to-date sales, and then you're going to put in, here I have my sales related, or those intentional deductions, percent of sales. Then I have my preventable, and then the total. So I don't have a separate column for that third category, unauthorized, but that you can tell the difference. It's whatever it doesn't add up to, and we didn't have room on the page. But again, whatever works for you. And one of the things, whenever you're using sales, it's really important to think about what sales do you want to use. So for example, typically, if I get a deduction this month in February, it's probably not for, almost always, it's not for sales in February. Usually it's for sales, depending on your payment terms. Usually it's for sales like at least a month or two prior, at least last month or 2 months ago. So some companies say that really doesn't matter. I'm going to be consistent. I'm just taking year-to-date sales, today versus my deductions today. That's fine. These are not the deductions that you're looking at, the deduction dollars. These are not open. These are total deductions received. So you want to say, here are my total sales, whatever the time period is, and here are my total deductions for the time period. So sometimes what we do is we have a lag. So we may decide we're going to have a 2-month lag. So I'm going to look at my deductions for for however many months, let's say 4 months, and then I'm going to look at sales for 4 months, but I'm going to move it back 2 months so that I'm looking at 4 months, but it's lagged by 2 months, so that I'm trying to match up my sales with my deductions a little more. Sometimes it's a little hard to do. Certainly it's hard kind of in the beginning if you're doing a year-to-date. Often with companies we do kind of a rolling 12 months or something like that. Whatever, again, works for your company, whatever you feel good about, and you just look at the data and you interpret it knowing what you've done. So here's the way another dashboard might have looked. And again, some similar information, some a little bit different. Let's look at a few of the differences. With this one, they wanted to look at also deductions by reason code, what was over 90 days and under 90 days in terms of the dollars, the open deductions by reason, but they really wanted it in a chart form. They felt that it was really helpful for them to be able to look at it and quickly say, whoa, what's going on with shortages? I got a lot of that lighter blue shortages. That's over 90 days. I don't like that. Okay, so that's that. Another one would be here, again, open by reason at the end of the month. Different things. You figure out what it is that works for you. Here we have, again, some different chargeback balances. This one, they like to include the count. Most people like to put in some percentage of over 90 days. And, and look at this customer. I mean, it's sample data, but their top 10 is 80% of the total. So it really shows you how so frequently you can focus on the top guys and figure out what it is that you want to do. This is another customer, and it's very interesting. They had 2 halves of a dashboard. And we all know what deductions are and those short payments that you get, but we also know that often we're giving off invoice, we're giving discounts, or we're giving allowances or some sort of a promotion, and we do that off invoice. So for this company, they wanted to see not only the deductions, but they wanted to see what they call their total sales dilution. So they really wanted to see, if you look kind of on the bottom left here, you see year-to-date commercial dilution. So here are different reasons, but a lot of these they give off invoice. So if we were only looking at the deductions that came through the accounts receivable, they would not have the full picture. So the top part looked at total sales dilution and gave them reasons so they really understood what the dilution was. But then at the bottom of their report, this is the bottom, that we called AR deductions, so that they understood. We showed, here's what's open, here's what's coming through. And what was really interesting for this customer is senior management really didn't understand the difference between total dilution and what deductions are. So they were so confused when we started talking about things that we really had to have a whole education first about what the difference was and what they could understand, and then we created something that made sense to them. So in addition to the charts, we're able to show them kind of for their biggest reasons that they had for the deductions. It was really important to say, excuse me, so on this open deductions that are unidentified, here are the top customers. Here are the top 5 customers where we have big unidentified balances. So let's focus on that. You know, here are the shortages. We've got all these shortages. We've got, you know, $1.6 million of shortages. The top 5 customers are over 50%, and here's who they are. So let's figure out, and here's how long it's taking us to deal with them. Let's try to figure out what can we do. It just focuses management. You know, pricing. Hey, who's doing that target account? Why are we having a problem with pricing? Is it the customer's fault? Is it the salesperson's fault? Again, it's just sort of driving action. You really want people to take notice and to ask questions and to get things done. A couple more things. Here's something, just a couple more that I have to share with you. Something that I think is very interesting. I have a client recently where they had a really big deduction backlog, a huge balance, and what they found was they wanted to know how they were doing on the backlog, and they were getting confused because they said it's a moving target. They keep getting new deductions, and people are getting confused, or people are putting them all together. It's like, how are we doing on the old stuff versus how are we doing on the new stuff? So what we decided to do is sort of draw a line in the sand, and we said, okay, everything earlier than October 1st, we're going to call the backlog, and everything after October 1st is going to be kind of the newer stuff. And we're going to treat them as 2 separate kind of piles of deductions and see how we're doing. So as you can see in the first week, that I'm showing, first week here, yeah, $25 million in the backlog and $3 million otherwise. So obviously, you know, it's going to change because you're not going to add anything to the backlog. But by focusing on this and showing people what was happening, we were able to really show management how they were making tremendous progress on the backlog. And sometimes if we were not able to make the same progress on the new deductions, maybe it was because of the volume of deductions that were coming in. So this was really helpful to be able to focus the discussion properly with senior management to figure out what was going on and what were they doing. And finally, another example is for this company, they like to track the status of a deduction, where it was in the cycle, which they called their action code. So here, what we were able to track, and they were doing this dashboard weekly, they were able to show, let's see what we have that's in our new status, so no one's worked on it yet. Let's see what we have that's in our resolution or research and validation. What have we defined and decided is invalid? What are we waiting for sales to get back to us on? And what are we waiting for some type of approval? So again, very quickly, rather than have everybody just look at this open balance, a total open balance, and say it's sort of a blame game and everybody starts talking to everybody else and whose fault is it, what this really does is it enables people to say, hey, what do I have in this sales request? Let me look at that. How many dollars do I have? What can we do? How about this new stuff? Wow, it looks like we're making really good progress. What can we do? This research and validation, what can we do to make that better? It's just, you can have much better conversations that are much more focused on critical factors. So what you should do when you introduce the dashboard, a couple of things to think about is, first of all, when you prepare a dashboard, don't get too attached to the first one. Think of it just as a draft dashboard and solicit management input. Send it, give it to a few people, walk them through it, think about it with them, and see if you can fine-tune it. Does this make sense? Does that make sense? And it's going to change over time. I definitely recommend that you include your data sources on the dashboard. So typically what I try to do is under each of the charts or tables, I'll write source and then I'll say where that data comes from, and I'll make sure to say exclude such and such or filters out such and such, just so that people know where it comes from. Because when you do this, you'll often find that people may challenge your data initially, because you'll see that companies, you have people are looking at data from different places and different reports and different sources, and they don't tie. So it's very good to let everybody see what you're looking at, and they will also let you know if there's something that you're missing. It's possible that it could take several months of reviewing the dashboard before management becomes comfortable. You have to go over it. Once you're working with it, it's very clear and very logical to you, and it makes a lot of sense. But sometimes senior management, if this is not how they look at it, and even when they look at it, they're looking at it in 30-second snips. If they don't get it very quickly, it's going to be challenging. And so you're going to want to explain it to them. And as they start to understand it, I've really seen over and over again that 3 months into reviewing the dashboard, suddenly senior management says, hey, what I really want to see is, they want something tweaked or they want to see something a little different, and that shows you that they're really looking at it. And that's a good thing. Or sometimes companies where they've stopped doing it for whatever reason, and senior management says, where's that dashboard? So in my mind, that's what you want. You want to get them engaged, and you want them to look at what's going on because you want their support when you need it. The goal is really to have management ask questions so that they can ask for the data, and you can start doing things. You can start giving them information, and that to me is really, that's when you know that it's been successful, and that's something that's really very helpful. Just a couple of other things I just want to share with you before we take any questions that you have. One is, think about, I developed this, what I call this deduction management maturity model. And a maturity model really just is a continuum of any process. And a company may be at sort of the low end of the spectrum and rise up to the high end of the spectrum. So in looking at deductions, I think companies that are sort of at the lower end of the spectrum, I call them ad hoc companies. And then if you get a little bit better, you become reactive in the way you're managing deductions. You might progress from reactive, the next step is proactive, and then finally you're an optimized company. And when I look at companies on this continuum, I typically look at kind of these 6 characteristics, or over on the left-hand side, or factors. How well do you manage your customer compliance information? What is your cross-functional collaboration like? What are your deduction management processes? How do you use technology? What is your trading partner relationship like, the non-sales trading partner relationship? And then finally, how are you managing your trade promotions? So it's something that is really, I find, often very good for companies to look at, to see where they fall, kind of circle where they fall on each one of these factors, and then be able to say to management, wow, we're reactive, for example. We really need to move towards optimized. Most companies are not at the same level on all of the same factors. I don't think, I have companies that are optimized in different levels, but I'm not sure that I have one that's 100% optimized. Most companies I find are in the reactive, moving towards hopefully proactive. But it's really, if you would like, you'll see this, if you'd like me to send you a bigger copy of this, you'll see my email address. Feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to send it to you. Also, I can send you the link where you can go, and it'll ask you 6 questions or 7 questions, and based on your response to the question, you'll get kind of a report back saying this is where you are, and based on where you are on the continuum, this is what you need to do to get to the next level. So if that's interesting to anyone, feel free to send me an email. Kind of the last thing I just want to share with you, if anyone is very interested in deduction-related things and want any more information, again, feel free, send me your email address. I'll add you to my distribution list that I do not do very much with, but when I have training, maybe I'll send an email every couple of months about certain training or publications. I do have something that is called Attain Answers, and if you choose to be part of that, people submit questions that they want to know, and I send those questions out to those people and then compile them and send the answers out. And then finally, I have a LinkedIn group that's called the Customer Deduction Insider, and it really is just practitioners, people who deal with deductions, and they kind of do their own thing, and people ask each other questions. I think there are about 600 people who are members right now, and they just ask questions and respond, and that's it. So what I'd love to do now, if it's okay, if anyone has any questions, if I can answer anything, I'd be happy to. And if you want that maturity model or anything, you can see my email address on the screen.
All right, so if anyone does have any questions, you guys can feel free to put them into that questions function in your sidebar, and I will be sure to pose those questions to Jessica. We've had a couple people ask if they will be getting a copy of the slides, and I just wanted everyone to know that we will be sending everyone who attended the presentation today a copy of the webinar slides, either later today or first thing tomorrow morning.
Great. Yeah, and if anyone sends me an email with the looking for the maturity model, I'll probably include it as well. So whatever, that's great.
And then just while we're waiting for some questions to come in, if I would just again like to ask you guys to please fill out the survey that will go out at the end of the webinar. It'll just pop up on your screen. And like we said, it takes less than 30 seconds to fill out, and it gives us a lot of great insight on what we can do to make these webinars better and how we can continue to serve your needs in the right way for these webinars. So I'm not seeing any questions, but I'm going to leave this open for a little while longer just in case we do have a couple people who are still typing or anything along those lines.
Great. And if anybody finds that they are starting to create a dashboard and they have some questions, or they're stuck, or even if you want me to take a look at it, I'd be happy to. I'm passionate about helping companies really take control of deductions, and I really love this stuff. So if you just send me an email with it, I just would be happy to just quickly take a look and say, hey, you might want to add this, or did you think about this, or why are you looking at that? If you get stuck and don't know how to look any further or how to get the data, also feel free to let me know. If you've got a big extract of data but you're not comfortable using pivot tables, reach out to me also. I'm happy to kind of share with you some really, really quick pivot table guidance that will make it so simple for you to gather the data and get it in a form that you can use for a dashboard.
All right, so we did have a couple questions that came in. The first question was, in general, what do you think are some of the can't miss or most important features when creating a deductions dashboard?
I think, first of all, showing total deductions received is, you got to show that. You have to show what's coming in is really important. Then, obviously, you also have to show what is open, the total deductions open, and I would definitely include some aging there. So the total open and aged over whatever it is. If you currently do a great job and you want to show 30 or 60 days, great. If you really don't do such a good job and want to show a bigger bucket to start with, that's fine too. But I think that's important. If you have a number of compliance type violations in your organization, then I think having a responsible department is really helpful. You know, sometimes what drives it is what your problems are. So think about your problems and then say, how can I shine light on these problems so that people become a little bit accountable? Showing your top open deduction balances by customer is also a really good thing because it helps you focus. So often when you look at deductions, it can be overwhelming because it's either one big number or 20,000 line items, and the goal is, how do I take that number and break it into really bite-sized pieces? And you start doing that by either looking at it by a reason code, what's a big reason code, or by customer, and then you can start saying, let's just look at this first customer. You know, if I have it by customer, or I show some of my big customers, maybe you have a conversation with the dashboard one month, let's look at this customer and see what we really can do to do a better job on that customer.
All right, another question we have is, do you think there should be a threshold on deductions that are considered miscellaneous or minimal?
So that would be like, should you have an auto write-off tolerance? I think in general, yes. I think in general you should have like an auto write-off tolerance. However, what I think is if you have an auto write-off tolerance, that does not mean or should not mean you automatically write them off and you never ever look at them again. That's not what it should mean. What it should mean in my mind is you write it off, but then you go back and maybe whether it's monthly or quarterly, you look at these, but you look at them in bulk. Maybe you don't look at each one, but I'm going to look at them. If I have the reason codes from Deduction, then I'm going to look at it by a reason code, like by customer, and sample some of them and look and go, wow, this is my problem, and I'm doing this over and over again, or this is invalid and I'm doing it over and over again. I'm not going to look at all of them, but I may do some sampling. I think it's, you know, I know sometimes when you do have auto write-off and if the dollar amount doesn't amount to very much, it's easy not ever to look at them. And if you're so busy and so behind and overwhelmed with deductions, for a while that might be okay, but maybe I would say then you should outsource them. You know, let somebody go and look at some of them, and you can pay them on a contingent basis if they can recover any of them. But when you get things under control, you should still look at them. And if you're thinking about what should your auto tolerance amount be, it really definitely varies between company and industry. I think overall, when we did the last benchmark survey, it's probably about $25, which depends, might be low. What I would do is, if you're looking for your tolerance that you want to propose management, take all of the deductions that you received in a time period, and hopefully a big enough time period. Let's say the last 12 months if you can do it. And what I would do is look at, like, have all the deductions, each one, I would sort it by dollar amount of the deduction, and then you can go and look and you'll see kind of where your great cutoff is. You'll see, wow, if I go and make it $25, it's, you know, I get rid of 2% of the total deduction dollars and 40% of the individual deductions. You know, that's huge. That's what you want to do. So you can find where you want to be and what makes sense. And again, if it's confusing and you don't know how to do that, but know that your people are overwhelmed, you know, call me. I'm happy to walk you through what I would recommend and look at something with you, and I'm sure we can get you there.
All right, another question we have is sort of more of a general question, but that question is, how and where do you start a dashboard? What would be the real first step?
I'd say the real first step is, what information do I have? So what information do I have? Do I have open deductions? Do I have it by customer? Do I have it by dollar? Do I, you know, by reason code? What do I have? And then looking at what I have, then what can I do? Let's say I have very, very few data elements. Well, then I'm going to be very limited in the dashboard I can put together. But then I might want to say, but how can I get more information? You know, chances are you have 6 or 7 data points for each deduction that you've received. So you want to use those. I mean, hopefully I can get total deductions received and I can get open deductions. And if I can do that, and I have it by customer, and I have maybe a reason code, or I have an amount, or I have a date, then I can start doing a lot of different things. I would recommend you look at what you have, and then take a look at some of the samples that I gave you and say, oh yeah, I would love to be able to see that. Oh yeah, no, that would be helpful. And see if you can build it that way. You know, and again, if you have a question, you know, let me know, reach out to me, call me. You know, it's funny, I do have a new service called Deduction Therapy, and it's working with companies on a monthly or quarterly basis, and it's exactly getting a dump of their data, and from that, preparing the dashboard, as well as coming up with a narrative of what I see in the data, how you stand against benchmark information from other companies, come up with an action plan, and like a 2-hour conference call on a monthly or quarterly basis. So if anyone is interested in, you know, hearing about that, happy to share that with you. And often companies use that for a few months, and then they are off and running and doing it on their own.
All right, so it looks like we're going to wrap the presentation, as I don't think we have any more questions. Oh, we have one more. The last question is, what is the common number of people to have working deductions?
Oh, so you think about that question. What is a common number of people having working deductions? Well, it really depends on how many deductions you have, right, and the size of the company. So it's definitely not something that I can answer generically, because there is no kind of right answer. It depends on how automated you are and all of that sort of stuff. But whoever asked that question, if you want to send me an email, happy to set up a time to have a quick conversation with you, and you can tell me a little bit more about your specific situation, and I can definitely give you some guidance as to you don't have enough, or you have too many, or think about this, or here are things that you need to move from where you are to a more optimized state. There's so much that's being done in the area of technology right now. I'm doing a lot of discussions on enabling technologies to manage deductions. There's so much that's out there that is on the cloud that makes that kind of takes all of these manual activities that people are doing, whether it's at Cash App and coding deductions, or creating kind of separate spreadsheets to figure out how to get the deductions into the system, to automatically pulling customer backup information from vendor portals, to pulling proofs of delivery from carrier websites. There's so much that can be done automatically now that there's really a lot that you can do.
All right, we have another question that came in while you were answering, and that question is there any suggested software that you have that would make these dashboards easier to create?
Well, you know, there definitely are some third-party software that has like a dashboard built into, like, let's say their deduction management piece. But what I have found is I always like to tweak mine. It's hard, for example, to get a dashboard to give you the total deductions received year to date and the open at the same time. You can do it, but really, if you've got good reports, I create the dashboard in Excel often, and I'm not the most technical person in the world by any stretch, but I create a dashboard in Excel, but then I bring the information, let's say from the extract, into a separate pivot table, and using that pivot table, I populate the dashboard, because I like to have, like, last month, this month, you know, everything, and it's really hard to have that system generated. You can do it, but it's a lot more effort to program that than to just create my pivot table, and takes me less than 10 minutes to update the monthly flash report. And as I do that, it's really making me think about the data and looking at it and that kind of stuff.
All right. Yeah. So now with that, I think we're gonna shut down. I don't see any more questions that have popped in here. So I'd like to thank Jessica for taking the time out to present today, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to our presentation. As I said, if you guys could just take the 30 seconds to fill out our survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar, we'd greatly appreciate it. and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thanks a lot, and have a great rest of the day.